Hello everyone, what a privilege to be here today to talk to you about design for behavior, specifically within hospitality space. In this talk today, I'm going to take you through the kind of overview on that. Then the second part, I'm going to talk to you about color, but not really the kind of standard rules around color, but rather the myths around color and its impact on architecture, on design, specifically hospitality. And then I'll take you in the third part through some examples of work that we do and how this approach kind of impacts what we do and how we get to the results that we get to. So for too long, we've assumed that we understand the exact impact of space and architecture on our well-being, our health, the ways that we think, how it impacts our thinking. But it wasn't really until the 80s that we see the emergence of evidence-based design, and really only in 2000s that we see science and architecture meeting in the form of neuroscientists and architecture to form this principle of neuro-architecture, where science backs certain exact architectural typologies and vice versa, really informs it and helps us to design more intelligent, more human-centered spaces. So that building that you see there, designed by Louis Kahn, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, specifically built and dedicated to this principle of neuro-architecture. So we have this axiom of form follows function, born in the modern movement. And of course, the evidence wasn't there at the time of the impact of architecture. And despite all the purity of the architecture, it was really more concerned with architecture than with people. So form follows feeling, then gradually but significantly now have made space for this idea of form follows feeling to be a lot more focused on the impact on us as people. So let's just briefly go back to our development as human beings and why it's important to understand our hardwiring. So 250,000 years ago, more or less, Homo sapiens emerged, and the Earth is quite unstable at the time. A lot of mass melting of glaciers and mass eruption of volcanoes. The weather pattern therefore gets affected quite drastically, and it has an effect on our hardwiring, and it forces us to develop. And we have also a lot of migration and so forth, and so all these external pressures really force our hardwiring to kind of develop and has quite a strong impact on it. But then about 10,000 years ago we settle down and we have agriculture, but it's also the time that the planet settles down, and so there's no more new external pressures on hardwiring. And so the saying that you can take the person out of the Stone Age, but not the Stone Age out of the person, has a lot of bearing on us, because it is for that reason that neuroscientists say that our hardwiring, by all accounts that matter, stopped to develop, and therefore we have a lot of irrational response to our space around us, but it's significant and it's something to be understood. But that's why it's so difficult to understand it, and why it took so long for neuroscience and science to catch up and for architecture to kind of catch up. For the purpose of this talk, there's not enough time to talk about all the facets. I'm just going to focus on our senses, the 5 prominent ones, and then 2 more, and the impact that has, and then I'll go into the principles of color. So our behavior is really strongly influenced by multiple things, the senses being one of them. So those 5 senses that you see there, the kind of the way they overlap to impact our behavior in various parts and weightings. Then I'm also going to talk about interoception and proprioception. So the more senses we engage, the more strongly we are tied to a moment or to a place. So the first one, our sense of sight. Now, it's first because it's the strongest sense. If we do not like what we see, we will not enter a space. So first impressions are lasting impressions. We need to design for the eye of the beholder, as subjective as that may be. So to get that right, we need to completely understand the core audience that we're designing for, not the client that's paying us, but the people that will most probably come to the environment that we're creating. And to understand that, we need to look at the competitors, and the strategy is then completely based on who the audience is that the venue needs to attract. If people like what they see, they will enter, and it'll have a domino effect, the visual, on all the other senses. As we said, it's the strongest one, but therefore the most significant impact it'll have is our sense of taste. If we're designing a restaurant, and the visual disconnect sits between what they see as a wrapper, as the kind of environment that they sit in, and the food, if that disconnect is there, then we have a problem. So it's quite critical, therefore, that the space lines up with what's presented as food so that expectations could be met. And this brings us to hearing, or sound. It's far more important than we may think. Acoustic control in especially a restaurant within hospitality is vital for the following reasons. It is the loud noise that attracts us from being able to smell or taste food properly. So the principle in restaurants when the acoustic control is not there is called the Lombard effect. It's when I need to speak louder to be able to hear you, vice versa to be able to hear me, because the people next door are trying to speak louder over the noise that they're experiencing, and so we all start speaking louder and louder, and it becomes this high-pitched noise. So that brings us to something you may be quite familiar with, the term aeroplane food. It's the constant drone in the background, that very high-pitched noise that alters our perception of smell and of taste, and thus it doesn't matter how good the food may be, if the acoustic control is poor, the quality of the food will also be poor. And then we have smell. Smell is the most primal of our five senses, developed over thousands of years to help us to survive. We have over 400 smelling receptors. So when we're hungry, our bodies boost our sense of smell to help us to find food. Now, this is why we see in great hospitality open kitchens. Apart from the theatre, we talk about theatre all the time, and I'll at the end talk to that in one of the examples, that it brings on the display of making of food. It's also the smell that then is allowed to travel right through the space. And if it's not enough, then we have scent marketing to help pump smells right to the kind of outer edges of the restaurant. And this is known to boost turnovers by up to 300%. Now that's significant. So that's where design really matters, and something one needs to think about when designing these hospitality spaces. And then we get to our sense of touch. Now, touch is the very first sense that we develop. It's super primal, super instinctive, and it really impacts quite dramatically the way that we make decisions. Now, through neurons in the skin, we are able to sense pressure, temperature, vibration, pain, and it's this tactile stimulation that we need to think about when we design hospitality, right from the front door, the knob or the entrance door finishes, texture, the menu, when you hold that in your hand, the tablecloth, the seat that you touch when you pull it in and out, the crockery, cutlery, and it's quality that we associate with texture and with weight. Think about when you go to a fast food restaurant, the chair is light, the texture is smooth, the menu is light, as opposed to fine dining where the menu may be quite heavy, maybe leather bound, stitched, the chair is a lot heavier, the cutlery is a lot heavier. So it also impacts, therefore, the length of time that you spend. So it's quality and time. The heavier and the more consideration to texture, the longer the dwell time in the restaurant. The lighter, the smoother, the lesser the dwell time. Think about your experiences in fast food versus fine dining. Taste is super interesting. In the Segal Department of Neurobiology in Hi-Fi, they discovered a link between what they call the taste cortex, the area of our brain responsible for encoding the sense of taste, and the hippocampus, the part of our brain recording time and place. Now, they found a definite link between the taste cortex and the hippocampus. So this means by extension that if the experience is not great, taste would not be remembered. So the experience within a restaurant, if it's memorable, you record more significantly time and place linked to food and the food memory. So think about this for yourself. Think about, do this test for yourself, your favorite food memory. Now the chances are when you think about that, you'll come up with a person that you spent it with first. It was a time that my girlfriend and I went on our first dates, and then you'll think of the food. Or it was a time I came back from uni after a year away. My mother made my favorite dinner or lunch. It's always an association with people first, and the people therefore, and that experience links up with the memory therefore of the taste. Quite fascinating. And then we get to our sixth sense, this principle of proprioception. Now, proprioception deals with where our bodies and our body parts are in relation to each other in space, how we imagine them to be. Think about bringing a fork to your mouth, closing your eyes and not crashing it into your face. Is that exact ability to understand exactly where it is in relation to everything else? So it's quite an important sense. It's poorly understood at this point because Piezo2, the enzyme responsible for this perception or the sense, was only discovered in 2009, and by 2015 they were only just discovering what it did in mice, let alone what it would do in humans. We do know that people without Piezo2 have a problem when the lights go out or when they close their eyes, they lose perception of their body in space and often will stumble and fall. Very few people with that problem though, but that is the Piezo2. And it's critical for space to understand, so ergonomics has a part to do with that. We have a sense of height and width and so forth, and if it's out, we feel it. Think of the sense of climbing stairs. If there's one stair, we tend to fall over it because we haven't yet sensed it. When it's two or three, it's always better. Within a space, we tend to not fall over two or three stairs, but we do fall over one. And think about driving a car. When driving a car, we understand exactly where our limbs are without, and being able to control the levers and all the controls without having to look at where they are. You just sense it. And so that's proprioception. So in short, interoception is the feeling of knowing, the sense of our internal organs. It is knowing your heartbeats, knowing when it goes faster and slower, knowing when to go to a bathroom, feelings of hunger, of thirst, hot and cold. So interoception and proprioception helps us with all those emotional connections and bodily experiences within a space. So think about it as sensing the atmosphere. And the difference between, say, touch, interoception, and proprioception, well, they're all at play, say, when we drink a hot beverage. Touch helps us to understand how hot or cold it may be. Proprioception helps us to bring that beverage to our mouth without crashing it into our face. And interoception helps us understand how we feel about it. So interoception and proprioception are thus extremely important factors when it comes to the designing of an interior space. So for today, I thought I would just stick to the principle of senses and how they impact our behavior and how they connect us to space and place and memory and experience and so forth. There are many more things outside, but too many things for a short talk like this. But I think the other one that I thought would be appropriate would be to talk about color, as it is so often used as a device to supposedly impact behavior and connect us to space. And there are a lot of myths, and I want to talk about that. There are too many anecdotal kind of opinions about color, and science has proven a lot of those opinions to be not correct, and in fact quite diversely different from what we may expect. So let me just touch on that for a moment. And as a kind of an introduction to this, this little story, in 1927, 4 leading U.S. retailers, Fellini's in Boston, Best & Co. in New York, or Halls in Cleveland, and Marshall's in Chicago, get together and they devise this plan, this kind of clever marketing plan to get people to spend more money, to lift sales. And it's a time when boys and girls simply wear gender-neutral white dresses. They were easy to clean and easy to pass down, and so that was kind of accepted at the time. So they come up with this marketing plan for color-appropriate clothing. And they convince parents that there are colors that boys need to be dressed in and that girls need to be dressed in, so that they would need to change the entire wardrobe instead of baby accessories in the appropriate gender colors. So advertising on this soon starts, and it's super effective. What they decide is that red at the time is seen as more masculine. It informs the color pink for boys, and popular paintings at the time depicts the Virgin Mary in blue, and so that informs the blue color for girls. But somewhere along the Second World War, this script is inexplicably flipped by the public with no apparent or logical reason, except that people simply decided for it to be so. This time the fashion houses follow, and pink starts being marketed and sold by fashion brands and retailers as the perfect color for girls, while blue follows for boys. Prenatal testing at the time is seen as the biggest driver, fueling the flames of this color adoption. And expectant parents learning the sex of their unborn babies could now go shopping for girl or boy merchandise, including sleepers, crib sheets, strollers, car seats, and so forth. So interesting story there. Let's look at color a little bit further. Our relationship with color can be fickle. We know that's super fickle, and it can be super fluid, and it's influenced by many things, fashion being the biggest, and popular cultural events and people. And a great example of this is the red necktie. Now, whilst it's now the uniform of choice of politicians, there was a time in the early 1900s when the red neckties were actually only worn by male prostitutes in Philadelphia, advertising their trade. And it took a dashing John F. Kennedy, some 50 years later, to change that trajectory of the red necktie. And then Barack Obama, some 50 years after that, cement this as the Obama uniform. Now, it is true that our response to color depends largely on where, on what, and when the color is applied. It is super contextual. We may love a specific color in a red Ferrari, for example, a specific red, but that exact same color may be highly inappropriate for the exterior, say, of a church, or indeed the suit that we may wear there for a wedding or for a funeral. That said, though, in certain Asian cultures, as we know, red is actually the perfect color to wear to a wedding, and is considered to be lucky and auspicious. So whilst white symbolizes purity, innocence, peace, and cleanliness in the West, and therefore the perfect color for weddings, it is considered to be the color of death, bad luck, and mourning in some Asian cultures, and the color traditionally worn at funerals. So now it becomes really interesting. So how does color psychology apply to humans when it comes to food, and indeed the spaces that the food is served in? So there are many credible sources backed by empirical scientific data on how humans respond to the color of food. And this knowledge has been used for decades by big food companies to manipulate, say, the color of apples, make it more red, so we believe it's tastier or sweeter. Manipulate the color of meat, so we believe that it's fresher and healthier. And this is because we have certain exact expectations of what the color of food should be. And that's evolutionary development for survival, to understand what is fresh and what is rotten. So in a now famous study in the 70s, subjects were served blue steak and green French fries. But with speciality lighting, the steak and French fries appeared their normal colors. and the products tasted just fine and people enjoyed their meals. However, as soon as the effects were turned off and the lighting returned to normal, revealing the true colors, all the subjects, of course, lost appetite, and some even became physically ill. So with that said, does this color association with food also translate to preferred background colors that our food is consumed in? The popular belief is that it is so, and that one can assign very specific behavioral properties to specific colors to trigger very specific behavioral responses. That said, science seems to challenge this assumption. Generally speaking, the theory behind the color psychology in restaurant design goes more or less like this. The warm spectrum of colors, red, yellow, and orange, tend to serve more as appetite stimulants rather than suppressants because they are commonly found in nature, and as nutritious food, we are thus in our primal brain still recognizing this as such. Similarly and conversely though, it is also assumed that the color spectrum of blue and purple tones are appetite suppressants because they are not commonly found in nature. So furthermore, it's believed by many that apart from perhaps some references to the blue in blueberries, our prehistoric ancestors never saw a purple fruit, flower, or animal, and thus when our ancestors used to forage, they would avoid eating those colored foods because of their potential spoiled or poisonous nature. So whilst these evolutionary color references in food may be true, science seems to indicate that the impact of this on our behavior within the physical space may not only be far less severe, but also perhaps in some cases completely false when it comes to its application as a device to impact our behavior within the physical space, especially, say, for example, our eating behavior in restaurants. So in addition, our response to colors are contradicted by so many claims. Yellow, for example, is often said to enhance our appetite. So generally speaking, yellow is believed to help increase our sense of joy and optimism and assist us in alleviating stress because the brain generally releases more serotonin when surrounded by yellow, and thus this joyful state by extension is believed to lead in an increased desire for food. However, that said, from a scientific point of view, elevated serotonin is actually a hunger suppressant that can activate some neurons that would rather reduce one's appetite than increase it. So red, in turn, is almost universally associated with strong emotions such as love, passion, and anger. In addition, the color of strength, courage, and danger. But the exact severity of its impact, especially on patrons in a restaurant interior, is highly debatable. Certain reds, sometimes combined with yellow, are said to be the perfect color for fast food or quick service restaurants, where we need the tables to turn quicker. Think Burger King, McDonald's, Red Rooster, KFC. But the exact impact of red on our transactional behavior is not 100% clear. Thus, perhaps the propensity to use red in fast food establishments may have something to do with the fact of that kind of mystical circularity that they are red because other fast food restaurants are also red. So that said, we do associate red with fast. Think again Ferrari, and it's also the most dominant in the color wheel with the longest wavelength. So we subconsciously may also assume that the food of a fast food joint with predominantly red color may be better and faster than, say, a brand using predominantly purple. Like Taco Bell, perhaps, if this was in fact 100% true, and the impact as severe as often claimed, then Subway, green and yellow, at number 2 in the US, Starbucks, vivid green, marigold, and white at number 3, and indeed Taco Bell, purple at number 11, should immediately be told that they need a color overall. The truth is that most of the current scientific data around this behavioral response to color in interior design, especially within its application of restaurant design, is contradictory or inconclusive. So one such inconclusive study was done in 2020 by the NIH National Institute of Health in Bethesda in the USA amongst 448 women in 2 experiments. And the first was with colored suites in blue, red, and colorless, say black and white. And the second was with suites on colored red, blue, and neutral backgrounds. So just before viewing the images, 50% of the participants received information about the supposed psychological effect of color on our appetite, and the other 50% did not. So the surprising result was that those informed just prior of the psychological effect of color in food on appetite corresponded 100% with the theory, whilst those that were not told about it did not. Additionally, colored backgrounds had no effect at all. That said, we did find some credible references around the ambient room light color in a restaurant and its effect on our perception of taste. Charles Spence from the Department of Experimental Psychology in the UK published an article in 2018 where the impact of ambient room lighting of the environment in which people tasted wine was tested. And the wine was placed in a black glass so as not to be a factor. And then the wine was tasted by a total of 3,000 participants against either red, green, blue, or white lighting. And they found a statistical significant effect of the ambient room light on global liking. Subjects liked the wine better when tasted in blue light or red light rather than in green or white. And the subjects were also willing, most importantly, to spend €1 more for Riesling when tasted in red light compared to tasted in a green light. Other control studies on the impact of contrast colors in the elderly and Alzheimer's were significant. Alzheimer's patients, where they noted in studies a 25% increase in food consumption when placed on red or blue plates, and as much as 84% increase in liquids when tasted out of red or blue glasses. Interestingly enough, though, red or blue contrast colors had the same result. So apart from these, there seems to be very little to no credible empirical studies on color psychology, its application on interior design, let alone its impact on us and our behavior within restaurant design. We are ever not suggesting for a moment that color psychology in its entirety is a myth, or indeed that color has no impact on our behavior. What we are saying, though, is that most of the guidelines and popular press on the matter of color in interior design, especially its use in restaurants, is highly subjective, is speculative, is oversimplified, and perhaps even dangerous. Almost none of the hundreds of thousands of articles printed or published have any reference backups, and those that do also mostly reference other articles with similar claims. So it is currently at most what scientists would perhaps refer to unsupported hypotheses. So with that, perhaps just a look at some examples. Now, they're not focused here, or we haven't focused on our best work, but we've just thought to bring out some examples of some work that explains some of the thinking. And this is one. It's a story of Isabella. The point is that nobody believes stories on the inside of menu covers. Even if they were true, they seem fake. And we needed to find this brand a way to make it relatable and more tactile. So apart from biophilia, which of course is massive post-COVID, as we spend more time in our gardens, and we were not allowed to kind of walk around. So we've started in all our spaces to do a lot of real plants. Greenery is not just visual, but it also gives us that sense of kind of belonging, being at home, sense of smell, and so forth. You can see also in these examples, open kitchen, sense of theatre, but also what it does to help us get a sense of smell out and across. In this case, a lot of pizza, and that sense of the smell of dough within a pizza oven. There's a tremendous amount of effect that it has in the total atmosphere. And then, of course, the lighting always at 27 100 Kelvin. That's the warmth ratio, not apparent here. And then the lux level at night is quite low at about 50 or 80, so that people feel more comfortable. But then in the next slide, just quickly, a sense of belonging, sense of place. So what we do when we build the restaurant is that we, when the floor is cast, we have a sign outside, people standing outside inviting people in to come with their pets, their dogs, their children, and walk through the floor and leave a permanent indent of the footprints. So that's a sense of belonging, sense of community. Think about every single time you come back, you feel that this is your place, you recognize the footprint, you see your dog's print there, or your kids, or your own. So a sense of community in place works quite well. And we've done this quite effectively over 6 or 7 stores now. And then this is the story of Isabella. It's a restaurant in Dubai. It's anchored by a very simple portrait of Isabella. It's massive. It's 3.5 by 4.4 meters. It anchors the entire space. It doesn't try to be more than that, just one simple thing that sits at the heart of the space, and then complementary coloring around it. But very important to note here, again, as you can see, it's very warm light, the spectrum 2700 Kelvin, I mentioned that earlier. The lux levels very, very low, only 50 to 60 on the actual tables, maybe 70 or 80 in between, when often years of people talk about a couple of hundred. Now that destroys the atmosphere always. It needs to be very low, dimmed right down to the table, so that people can feel they sit in their own space, yet aware of people around them. Helps with our reducing our inhibitions when lights are low, so it works quite well. And also a lot of hidden lights that only highlight the story that we're telling. We know the storytelling in restaurants are critical. And we also like reading a book. It mustn't be too direct. We always formulate our own story in our head of what the scenery was, what the people look like, the one that favors us. Restaurants always need to be the same, not be too direct. Arts, as they say, is the one that questions, and design is the one that answers. So just a beautiful balance in between all of those visual references. And this is an African village in the middle of a city in Sydney, in the heart of the city. It's located in the structural underpinnings of a skyscraper, and it's shielded from the outside, but as you can see there by this, not maybe quite clear, by a folded 21 meter high by 200 meter long brass curtain that separates inside from outside. And that represents the twig fencing one would find, say, in an African village enclosure, otherwise known in Swahili as a boma, which is a way to protect people and animals at night. So that's the reference of this brass curtain. And in the heart of it, there's a fireplace, and around the perimeter, we have 12 what we call lapas, and that's a Sotho word for home. And these are all 6-seater dining tables, so it allows some privacy, but yet it's open to inside and outside, so not too private, but some privacy. But what's unique to this in the experience, so also again, the lighting, critical part, plays a massive role in the lighting that we spoke about earlier. The space is extremely tactile, a lot of clay used, and a lot of traditional building methods. So we have the smell in addition to the clay, so it takes you to the kind of African safari where smells exist. There's the only way to translate the feelings that you would have in a safari in the middle of Africa. But what's also unique about this in the experience manner and the factor is that the seats have the kind of creature comfort identity that you would find in a car, and turning up the heat. So the seats have seat warmers, and that kind of interpretation of a blanket that you would find in a safari around a fire. So just bringing that to kind of a modern current space. And as you can see that in the right corner, that highest hut we call the King's Hut. It's the biggest dining room there that's private, but also has some visuals into the rest of the restaurant. Some dappled visuals and dappled light coming through everywhere. And then of course, you can see the massive trees, but they're not real trees, unfortunately, but it's still, biomimicry brings the same effect that biophilia does. You still have the same emotional connection. You can see it a bit better here. The trees are there as a kind of canopy, and we needed to bring that in because the ceiling is very high, 21 meters, and we're not allowed to attach anything to that ceiling. In that middle photograph is just us testing a prototype of what that hut, that unit, that LAPA could be, just testing the volume, the structure, the perception of, or the feeling you get when you sit inside it. Is it not too claustrophobic? So we needed to adjust it. We adjusted it to this point where it's now. And then on the right there, just testing the foams and the blankets that we're going to stitch in to form the seat warmers. So this is a restaurant in Parramatta, Hunts and Barrel. It's just to show a couple of things there. The use of light, again, warm spectrum, 2700 kelvins, low lux, 50, 60 on the table, 70, 80 maybe in between. The open theatre of the kitchen that you can see there for the theatre itself and also for the smells. And then the use of art. You can see that in the wall in the back. Now that art piece in the back is not only for the art, but also it's done on foam, so its acoustic properties are phenomenal. We used carpet on the floor and that soft finish on the back to manage the acoustic properties. So it also doubles up, as we say, as an art piece. And it references all the peoples that lived on the Parramatta River during time, like First Nations and all the people post that. And we used 5 well-known art pieces that we stitched together to form that one piece, and references to the artists and First Nations are on a brass plaque on the left of that, just out of sight. Very successful restaurants. It just plays to the simple, all those rules that we need as humans, the way we feel comfortable and how we prefer to behave, and designed within that kind of behavior. And then as last project, we have 1788 in Dubai. The story is a story around the first fleet journey from UK to Sydney. And it's a story of the flaxseed that they carried and used as product to spice food and also to make bed linen and clothing. So quite important. And then, of course, the flaxseed had the most beautiful flower that in the center there, the flaxseed flower. So we took inspiration from that. So the shape of the seeds to form the kind of covers around the perimeter in the sketch there above the bench seat. And then the flower, took some license there to extrapolate that flower into this beautiful center art piece that supports the mezzanine and also anchors the entire design for everything else to radiate from. And then finally that got played out into this these set of artist impressions that shows it in its kind of light intent and color and fabric and texture intent. So that's flower in the center there with a lot of hidden, concealed light, tremendous amounts of light that you cannot see the origin from or of, but it creates this kind of very warm glow, again 2700 kelvins and very warm lux levels 50, 60. And so it glows beautifully. It's warm, and it's think about the experience of sitting at a fire, what that does to you around a campfire. And so that's the idea of this, a very warm glow. It inspires you to think, to tell stories, to be together, to eat, to kind of forget your troubles. And that's the idea of this centerpiece. And we believe with everything else that we've applied here, it's like the way, the distance between the seats, the privacy, and the way that people can still see each other, the distance to the kitchen, the openness of the kitchen, the way that the people can journey through this space, observe and be observed. Everything will sit quite beautifully together, and then it's anchored with beautiful biophilia all around. Will make for a super successful venue, provided they get the food correct, and of course they will, they're seasoned restaurateurs. But those are the kind of tricks or the things to watch out for, and the things that we certainly watch out for along our journey in creating successful venues for our clients. And I hope that this was also something that you learned from, potentially it triggered a lot of thoughts, and we'd love to hear from you if it's possible. Love to kind of reach out and talk to anybody that wants to talk about work and kind of the things that matter. And hope to be able to meet you in person. Thanks for attending this talk.